It's your regional business magazine show, Carib Money Report. I am Kimberly Ramkalawan, and coming up, we do a recap of some of the key moments in this year's 49th CARICOM Heads of Government meeting. We have the high and lows to major announcements and partnerships emerging. And In the News looks at Perenco moving up to Trinidad's top 3 gas producers. Our This Week in History is in keeping with CARICOM, and we'll look at the precursor to the CSM, the Grand Anse Declaration. All this and more in this week's episode. This week, we'll look into the CARICOM's 49th Heads of Government meeting held in Montego Bay, Jamaica. From diversifying trade and industrial projects to financing partnerships across the oceans, CARICOM heads had much on the table at this year's regular meeting. The leaders converged in Montego Bay, Jamaica for its 49th regular meeting. The incoming chairman and Prime Minister Andrew Holness shared that he believed the region possessed all that was needed to make it resilient, even in the backdrop of tariff and trade wars.
The new dispensation which is emerging, it is clear that the world is not unipolar and that there are opportunities that we must explore. There are gains which we have left on the table, unexplored. And as a community, we must strengthen South-South cooperation. We must strengthen our trade cooperation with Africa. And we must strengthen our internal cooperation. The resources in CARICOM are sufficient for us to provide for the needs of our people.
Outgoing Chairman Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley says the latest imposition on China cargo ships, along with the proposed U.S. tariffs, will only serve to unite the Caribbean.
The actions of the United States government and their promise to impose tariffs on all Chinese-made ships created a catalyst for movement in a way that we could not find on our own. And if anything, we must thank President Trump and the U.S. Trade Representative for that. And I want to thank the Caribbean Private Sector Organization for working with us as heads of government of the Caribbean community. An amazing 500 members of the private sector went on to a Zoom call, showing that when our vital interests are truly challenged, we know how to find unity in this region. Constantly at risk of the climate crisis, decimating that which we are trying to do in terms of open field agriculture, then we can begin to recognize that we do have the capacity to feed ourselves more.
Prime Minister Mottley, meanwhile, called for CARICOM bonds to be issued in order to facilitate debt swaps that would make the region more self-reliant when it comes to financing projects.
So that our region can start to finance our own development. Interest rates that are below 3%, and therefore we are in a position to be able to offer the opportunity for the participation of CARICOM bonds to our citizens at rates of return that are competitive with the private commercial banks, but are still lower than the lending being offered to many countries on the international capital markets. At the same time, in the last 6 months, we have done significant work to advance for the first time a regional debt swap initiative. My own country, Barbados, has now done 2 debt swap initiatives, one for nature and one for climate. In both instances, we have increased our capacity without increasing our debt by a single cent.
Expressing her understanding of the current global economic state, CARICOM Secretary General Dr. Carla Barnett reiterated the functions of CARICOM, one being to stand in solidarity with its peers.
Unprecedented global uncertainty, economic pressures, technological innovations, and our challenge our capacity to keep pace, climate vulnerability and the needs of our young people, our women and future generations compel us to act collectively with courage and with conviction. As much as we remain committed to the aims and objectives set out in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, we must also remain cognizant that moving forward is more difficult for some of us. In the spirit of family, we should seek to address the concerns of all if we are to be a community that benefits everyone in the region.
Now, following 2 days of plenaries, the closing press conference wrapped up all that was discussed and agreed upon, with particular interest in how the region was going to move forward collectively regarding the U.S. trade policy.
We also received updates on several frameworks and mechanisms for functional cooperation, which are at various stages of implementation or consideration. And these include the draft CARICOM industrial policy and strategy, which is being conceptualized to promote government interventions and policies to empower specific industries, sectors, and firms to achieve and sustain regional competitiveness. There is the development aspect, and we should continue to press home that trade should take into consideration the historical development issues of the region. Nevertheless, we have engaged with the U.S. trade representative on this matter, and they have essentially said that after the 9th, then they will re-engage with us for further negotiations. So we are preparing for very strong negotiations for our position.
As chairman for the next 6 months, Prime Minister Holness added that much work was to be completed in a draft industrial policy that would work to push regional competitiveness.
The draft CARICOM industrial policy and strategy, which is being conceptualized to promote government interventions and policies to empower specific industries, sectors, and firms to achieve and sustain regional competitiveness.
One of the issues on the front burner during the meeting included the delisting of Jamaica and Barbados from EU high-risk countries.
Region that will demand our solidarity. I speak specifically as early as this week of the actions of the European Parliament with respect to the failure to delist countries like Barbados and Jamaica, who have come off of the Financial Action Task Force list for more than 1 year, but for whom we remain on the European Union's enhanced delegated list, along with countries like Gibraltar and UAE that are the subject of their opposition.
A frustrated Barbados Prime Minister at the opening of the Caribbean Leaders Conference, she expressing her frustration after both Barbados and Jamaica were compliant to the EU AML and CFT framework but not been removed from the list by the EU Parliament.
But because of a technical mechanism by which they remove countries, Barbados and Jamaica continue to suffer at the hands of the listing process when we have been deemed to be fully compliant with all of the obligations required of us from the Financial Action Task Force. It is wrong, and if it was the shoe on the other foot, if the shoe was on the other foot, we would be told how to find ways of having our Parliament change the manner in which we address this issue rather than grouping all of the countries in one basket to be the victims of any opposition on any country in spite of the progress made by our countries.
However, following Prime Minister Holness's statements at the closing press conference, it was indicated by the EU via a communique that the European Parliament noted that in its vote on Wednesday, it decided to not object to the Commission's proposal on updating the EU list of high-risk third countries and territories with deficiencies in their regime on fighting money laundering and terrorist financing, as none of the resolution on objection secured majority support. As a result, Jamaica, Barbados, Gibraltar, Panama, the Philippines, Senegal, Uganda, and the United Emirates were officially removed from the EU list. On the sidelines of the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting, Jamaica signed on as the latest CARICOM state to take on membership with the Exim Bank. Jamaica is now the 13th CARICOM state to ascend to membership of the Exim Bank. During the regular heads meeting, Prime Minister Andrew Holness signed on to the establishment agreement of Exim Bank, deepening Africa-Caribbean ties and advancing the vision of a unified global Africa. The historic signing is said to unlock an additional $1.5 billion in financing support for Jamaica and the wider Caribbean, bringing Exim Bank's total approved facility for the region to $3 billion. Jamaica's ascension is a strategic leap toward integrated growth, mutual prosperity, and Afro-Caribbean self-determination, building on a growing legacy of African-Caribbean collaboration. And we are sure to cover the Exim Trade Expo, taking place in Grenada in the coming weeks. Switching gears now to outside of the CARICOM Heads meeting, the Eastern Caribbean states signed on an energy transition project. Here's a look of some of the other headlines making the rounds in the region this week. Members of the Eastern Caribbean states signed on to a major energy transition project aimed at unlocking utility-scale renewable energy investments across the ECCU as a means of addressing critical infrastructure and financing gaps in what has been called a coordinated phased approach. During the ceremonial signing of the Caribbean Resilient Renewable Energy Infrastructure Investment Facility, RREIIF, hosted in St. Kitts and Nevis, Eccb Governor Timothy Antoine explained the central bank's involvement being based on trying to transform the energy use and culture in the region, if it is to attract investors.
The fact of the matter is that we're spending $1.2 billion a year on our energy bill. The fact of the matter is that we are paying between 35 and 40 US cents per kilowatt hour for energy. And by the way, if you compare that with Mexico, for example, that is paying less than 10 cents, probably about 8 cents, you begin to understand why, notwithstanding how beautiful we are and how warm we are as a people, some decision to go to Mexico rather than the Caribbean because the room rates are cheaper. And a big reason for that is the cost of electricity. And if you begin to understand that in the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, energy accounts for between 20 and 25%. So that at the household level, you're talking about a significant proportion of the income on energy and energy-related products. And I have not yet touched on the fact that out of that 1.2 billion, we have to find close to 500 million US dollars out of our foreign reserves on an annual basis to pay for energy.
Worldbank Country Director for the Caribbean, Lilia Barun-Chiuk, says the region is at its renewable energy crossroads where it must move in another direction if it is to position itself for economic growth.
When energy costs an average of 6% of regional GDP compared to just 2.5% in other developed countries, we are not just talking about expensive electricity bills. We're talking about a fundamental barrier to competitiveness, job creation, and the prosperity. And in the next 5-10 years, these investments will need to be made. And this is not just a challenge. No, it's actually our moment. It's our moment to invest in renewable energy. It is a very narrow window. It is going to be very difficult, but it is an important window to replace the aging fossil fuel infrastructure with clean, resilient, renewable systems that will serve our region for decades to come.
The facility is said to have a combination of solutions for the renewable energy sector, providing support on project preparation, competitive procurement, and financial innovation to help reduce barriers to financing. Another objective is to strengthen the national power grids of the countries of the region. So far, it's said that Phase 1, 2025 to 2032, is already under implementation, targeting Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, with a $115 million in climate finance to deliver 60 megawatts of renewable capacity, while Phase 2 is now in preparation, with plans to expand to St. Kitts and Nevis, Dominica, in the near future. In other energy news, Perenco has announced its acquisition of the Greater Angostura producing oil and gas assets and associated production facilities from Woodside Energy in Trinidad and Tobago. This acquisition puts Perenco among the top 3 local producers as a major player in natural gas production in Trinidad and Tobago. The acquisition complements Perenco's existing asset portfolio, which includes the company's recent acquisition of BP's Kashmina, Amherst, Flamboyant and Immortal Kafi gas-producing assets and the Onyx discovery in the Teak, Salmon and Pui TSP area. In 2025, Perenco Trinidad and Tobago Limited announced the successful drilling of the Onyx well and a sidetrack in the eastern part of the Onyx field, demonstrating that Perenco's cost management philosophy allows the company to extend the life of mature oil and gas reservoirs, enabling production in what would otherwise be uneconomic or stranded wells. Commenting on the acquisition, the Honorable Rudal Munilal, Minister of Energy and Energy Industry, stated, "I wish to congratulate Perenco on this acquisition and to look forward to working with them to increase the production from all the acreage and assets under their control." Perenco's continued growth and the acquisition of Woodside's oil and gas producing assets demonstrates strong investor confidence and optimism for the future of the oil and gas industry of the east coast of Trinidad. Trinidad and Tobago remains an attractive location for operators such as Perenco due to its existing energy infrastructure, established and experienced flares, support services, and export route for LNG. The Jamaican government is looking to securitize the Sangster International Airport in order to raise up to $385 million in the international capital market. It's the latest securitization transaction executed by the Ministry of Finance and Public Service in the last year. And according to Fitch and Moody's, the proceeds from the transaction will be used to fund access to clean water through the financing of certain water infrastructure projects, support small and medium-sized enterprises, and general budgetary purposes for the government of Jamaica. The proceeds will also be used to fund Debt Service Reserve Account, DRSA, equivalent to 6 months of interest payments, the accrual account with at least $14.3 million, and the revenue account along with transaction fees and expenses, plus the purchase under the true sale of revenue right. The bond is secured by all the assets and accounts of Montego Bay Airport Revenue Finance Limited, MOAR, and rights under the government top-up agreement. The news also comes following several international ratings companies giving them an average B credit rating, with Moody's assigning a Ba3 and Fitch putting a BB positive, with a stable outlook for the proposed transaction. Some interesting moves by the Jamaican government as it shed some to gain some in other areas. Balancing off the sheets. When we return, it's your market trends update.
Magazine and news outlet covering the Caribbean. Contact us today at 868-783-5094.
Welcome back. It's now time for market trends. We begin with the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, which saw a large increase, more than 2.5 times in new transactions for the week. Medcorp is officially on the stock exchange, though off to a slow start. As the buzz surrounding Agostini and Prestige continues, so does their steadiness in the market. Moving to Jamaica, its market experienced a dip in volumes this week. Massey continues to trade steadily amidst negotiations. NCB Financial makes Jamaica's top 3 of the volume traded, although experiencing a small dip in movements this week. And Barbados sustained quite a slow week in market action, with significant drops in the volume of new shares traded, and a change in direction from real estate giant Eccb, as we see CIBC dominating the market this week. And to the Eastern Caribbean, where it received a substantial volume of new shares this week, 40 times that of last week, with TDC, Anse and Kitts Nevis Bank as the top contenders, attributing to this large jump in the market. And that's how we check in with the top regional markets this week. Coming up, we go to 1989 and revisit the Grand Anse Declaration.
To advertise with us, join us as the premier business magazine and news outlet covering the Caribbean. Contact us today at 868-783-5094.
We're keeping in theme this week, following the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting, as we look at the precursor to the CSME and what started it all. Grand Anse Grenada, July 12, 1989, goes down in the Caribbean's history with a declaration that signaled a political shift in the region's maturity and strives to become truly a Commonwealth Caribbean, adopted by the then 12 member states during CARICOM's Heads of Government conference, the Grand Anse Declaration. Its aim and focus: economic and political cooperation among the member countries, with its main objective in strengthening regional integration and enhancing Caribbean nations' social and economic development. The unique feature of the declaration emphasized the principles of sovereignty, non-interference and equality among the participating countries. To that would emerge what we call today the CSME, the establishment of the CARICOM single market and economy, something then Secretary General Roderick Renford worked on spearheading until the end of his term in 1992. The CSME aimed to create a unified economic space within the region by facilitating the free movement of goods, services, labor and capital. It sought to foster economic growth, increase competitiveness and provide opportunities for the citizens of member states. Its realization, much to the dismay of critics who shared their disappointment in the time taken to do so, only took root in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas in 2001. Its only detail separating it from the ideal single market and economy is the degree of additional harmonization of economic policies to support a single economy along with a common market. Part of its vision included a monetary union as being ideal, with the establishment of a regional central bank with fiscal policies which causes members to yearn for a higher level of integration. Under the Grand Anse Declaration, institutional cooperation is also preserved in the spheres of education, culture and health, as well as regional security and stability. And while many see the CSME as being born out of necessity as a region that stands against the world, the Grand Anse Declaration holds the place in CARICOM's historical timeline as one that culminates the call for deepening of ties within the community while laying the groundwork for what citizens of its many member states enjoy today, holding close to the roots for what also transforms tomorrow into a more tighter-knit singular region found in many commonalities. Some things that make us grateful to be part of the Caribbean community called CARICOM. We take in some messages now. Stay with us.
We want you to advertise with us. Join us as the premier business magazine and news outlet covering the Caribbean. Contact us today at 868-783-5094.
Well, that's how we end this week's show. Be sure to follow us on social media. I'm Kimberly Ram Kalawan. See you next week.